Aloha and welcome. I'm your host, Sean Lether. If you're watching us on YouTube, please help support all of our amazing speakers and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our Hawaiian IANDS YouTube channel. Today's guest, Gabriel Sereni, is a channel, medium, trance healer, and teacher who has taught thousands of students around the world on topics including intuitive development, altered states, subtle energy, identity, science and spirituality, and discerning higher guidance. But in 2019, despite decades of inner work and a multitude of spiritual experiences, Gabriel entered a profound dark night of the soul, a period of disconnection, stagnation, and emotional collapse. Through surrender, self-confrontation, and complete reevaluation of his identity, Gabriel learned to truly listen to his intuition and deepen his collaborative relationship with the spirit world. What followed was a complete realignment with his purpose, ultimately leading him to the soul-led work he does today. Tonight, Gabriel is here to share his experiences and the many things he has learned on his journey. You can learn more about Gabriel at gabrielsereni.com. Welcome, Gabriel. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Sean. Really happy to be here.
So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit of your upbringing and your spiritual experiences and um, your dark night of the soul and what you learned for it and what you're doing now.
Okay, so we got quite a few things. You can kind of keep me on track here, Sean, if I forget anything. But I will kind of start from the beginning and kind of work my way up more to the present time. I have had spiritual and psychic experiences since I was quite young. And so they have been kind of part of my life and part of my reality for a very long time. And I think, as I'll share in this talk today, and you'll find, despite that, I always haven't been in a place where perhaps I was in deep alignment or I understood what direction I was supposed to take or what I was supposed to do in my life, like what my purpose was. And I kind of have found there's sort of like a series of phases I kind of went through that many times between these phases required pivots or changes, both shifts in my identity as well as my perspective and my belief system. And they weren't always easy, as I'll share here in a moment as I go along. So, yeah, the earliest experiences that I remember are probably around the age of like 5 or 6. I don't know if I had them earlier, but there was one particular experience I wanted to share here, Sean, in a moment that I think pertains to guidance and alignment. But essentially, I was very empathic. I'm sure as many of you are here. I was sensitive, and at the time, I didn't know I was also psychic, as I also believe many people are probably just psychic when they're children and don't have that awareness. And there were some experiences that took me years or even into adulthood to kind of process what had happened. I had clairvoyant experiences when I was quite young. I don't know if I was 5 or 6, so we'll just leave it at that. But I remember looking into people's eyes, particularly adults, and I would sometimes like see like caverns and like colors and energy. It was perhaps a little bit what we describe as like psychedelic. I didn't know what that was. I just kind of experienced it, and I could tell fairly quickly that it made people uncomfortable when I was looking at them in that way. Later on, I came to realize that was clairvoyance, probably external clairvoyance, and these experiences, like I didn't have anyone to kind of help me to understand what was going on, or that I was different in this particular regard. Um, I had an experience when I actually had to kind of walk through a path. I was in kind of like a courtyard area, which was kind of interesting in that I wanted to walk this path and I had this very, very strong feeling that perhaps something bad was going to happen or that something was off. And this was probably my first major lesson in navigation and internal guidance because I didn't follow this. I noticed it. It was very clear. It kind of went into my body. I had an emotional feeling around this fear, not this fear, but this kind of off feeling. And I walked the path anyway. And then I went by this bush and I got stung by a bee. And actually, the bee left funny enough, it's been fading over the years, but it left a mark on my finger here that was the shape of a heart, which is kind of funny because I didn't think much about it until much later. But that was probably my first major lesson in following my intuition. Essentially, I had a feeling, I kind of had a sense not to cross that path, but I didn't understand how that logically connected to anything I was observing. So as a kid, I just thought, well, that's weird. Let me just go do this anyway. And that was perhaps like literally a marking on my body. It now looks like kind of like a birthmark or something of this sort. And unfortunately, I would have several more of these experiences as I kind of got older. But that was probably the first major one. When I got older, to kind of just fast forwarding here, Sean, I had experiences. Some of these were on my own. Some were like with my sister, where we would have psychic experiences and kind of wonder what we were perceiving. Some of them were like clairaudient experiences. We, for a period of time, grew up in what I believe was a fairly haunted house. We were near what was actually a very, very old, like Indian cemetery, to my understanding, to what my mom was sharing. And there was just a lot of strange phenomena in this house, like mattresses levitating, hearing something going up and down the stairs all the time. So it was pretty unusual. And then as we kind of fast forward, I didn't really personalize my psychic experiences or my spirituality until I got into my teen years. And I just kind of had this existential malaise. I kind of felt like, what am I like? What is the point of all this? Like everything seems kind of pointless. Like people are kind of just entertain themselves or distract themselves. Physical things weren't of much interest to me. And so I was kind of in a place where I kind of probably went into my first crisis. And from that point, I began searching and I began searching. And then I came across some yoga books. I remember opening a book from Swami Sivananda, and the book, it opened right to a page where it talked about the evolution of consciousness. And I remember this is like around, I don't know, age of, I would say 16. I saw that and I just had this knowing, and I'm like, that's what I'm supposed to do, or I'm supposed to focus on. However, as we can kind of, rationally think about right now, that's a kind of vague instruction. Okay, so it's to kind of help with the science or evolution of consciousness. And what does that even mean, right? And so we end up finding in our life, sometimes we'll come across these things and we just don't have a very clear meaning of what they are, even though they may be pointers in a certain direction. And so this is where we kind of get to some of these first lessons, like having to trust what is coming through or to follow through. And sometimes our curiosity is one of the pathways by which we are led on our path. And so for me, there was something very curious about that, like the fact that it really resonated, it felt correct, but it also kind of gave me a sense of, oh, there's more to reality than what I perceive. And I would like to focus myself on figuring out what that reality is or what's going on. And by this point, I would say I had kind of lost some of my abilities I had as a child. I still had psychic experiences. I had premonitions through dreams. I remember my college roommate, I finished his paragraph mid sentence, which really spooked him out. And, I didn't know how these things kind of worked. Again, I wasn't really making sense of the fact that like there may be a purpose to this, or maybe I should investigate this further. Um, so when I got into my later teen years, I had kind of a moment that really changed everything, which was I was now just newly in college. I was studying philosophy and psychology. My specialty was like in philosophy of science, and I also had a very strong interest in experimental psychology. And I remember reading Rene Descartes' books on the nature of reality and being at home. And by the way, this is a very good period to probably induce some experiences. I mean, I had no responsibilities. I'm in college. Money's not a concern. I mean, like, for all practical purpose, I could have been in a monastery, like in the Himalayas, and had that kind of spaciousness. And I remember having found out of body experiences or astral projection, and I was very intrigued by this phenomena. And I ended up, in a nutshell, I ended up having that experience at the age of 19. And I woke up outside of my body fully awake, which was confusing because you're like, wait a second, I went to sleep in my bed. So what am I doing here? And then I was like fully cognitive. I was awake just as we are right now speaking to each other. I couldn't actually tell the difference between the waking state and that state. And that was my first lucid out of body experience. And from there, I had a number of these experiences. I found I could induce them. What I didn't know until later on is that spirit guides or spirit helpers were helping me with these experiences, and you could kind of think of sort of guiding the process. My experience is kind of, maybe in the beginning we're more akin to like a Disney movie. It's kind of like, oh, I'm out of my body and I lost my fear of death and I could fly through walls and it was just very expansive and I felt very free and this is amazing. And this is really a confirmation for me that there is way more to reality than I think the world may be aware of, or generally is aware of. And those experiences started to get more and more interesting as time went on. And this is the reason why I made that analogy that in the beginning they were kind of like the Disney G-rated versions. I later ended up meeting non-physical entities in my out-of-body experiences, some who were dead who had crossed over. And I remember having an experience where I met one lady. This is maybe experience 7 or 8 to my recall, where I met one lady who, basically, I was out of the body, I was fully awake, and I was in another dimension that looked like a cash copy duplicate of New York City. And she came up to me and told me, "Look, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're dead." And I was like, "Wait a second, what?" Like I was totally confused. And I, thought, I didn't die. I don't know, understand. Wait a second. And I told her I had an out of body experience, and she told me we've heard, she said basically I've heard about those things, and I don't think they're real. That was my first lesson that spirits on the other side are not all enlightened. That was kind of and then from there were more and more experiences showing me a lot of different things around dimensions and aspects of the human condition as they translated into death and other aspects that were very eye-opening and forever changed my perspective, just of life and spirituality and things. And in some of the later experiences, I ended up, once you start having enough of them, you get the interest of guides to kind of work with them or get an invitation to work with them to help some of these people to cross over. So I, to this day, still do some of that work. Um, Now I have a family and responsibilities. I can't quite induce the experiences the way I could when I had none of these things and no concerns or worries. But what was interesting about all this was that after that, I ended up looking for an organization that would scientifically study this phenomena, or where I could also study how to practice this phenomena, and maybe teach people this, because that was a big part of my spiritual awakening. That was the path that had kind of chosen me. And I ended up joining an organization at the time that was like a psychic development organization that also participated in trying to help researchers. And they had a kind of a focus on out of body experiences. And what was interesting was that I was there for many, many years. I moved down to New York. So I was volunteering this organization. I moved down to New York City. And I opened a center for this organization while I ran a company in Manhattan. Well, originally in Queens, and then we moved it to Manhattan, and that company grew and grew, and I got a lot of real world business experience. I think probably some of my family was shocked that I was even able to run a company, given I'm not necessarily the most grounded person. But it was there was a lot for me to learn. It was a little bit like having your head in the cosmos and your feet on the ground, and trying to balance that as you're kind of moving through life. And so I learned a lot from my experiences of running the Psyche Development Center and from running my business with a team of employees, et cetera, and contractors around the world. So I found myself learning a lot. But what was interesting about this, Sean, was I felt that there was a lot I've gained from there. But another kind of theme that I have found with something to kind of note in our eternal navigation, and as we're kind of seeking deeper spiritual alignment, is often, if you do what you've always done, you get what you've always gotten. That's a phrase I heard from Anthony Robbins long ago. And so if you keep doing that thing, even if it was feeding your soul at that time, there will tend to be a kind of decline effect to which it is feeding your purpose and your energy. And I found that even though I was teaching out of body experiences for years, and this was a space that I thrived in, and also in the psychic development realm, there was still something missing. And I wasn't really quite sure what that was. What was interesting was around that time, this is actually now around 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. It's kind of shocking when I think about it. But so over 20 years ago, I had certain signs coming to me, and I can share what those were, that I may want to consider studying mediumship and channeling. And what was interesting was that the organization I was part of, they did not have a path for this. They were really, if anything, they were very cautious around mediumship, and kind of viewed it as something, because this organization had a very was quite, I would say, I would personally describe it as having been quite masculine. They were very strong in energetic control, psychic self-defense, sending energy out, feeling when it touches someone else's field, bringing the energy back, doing all kinds of energy maneuvers, which formed a foundation for my work later on. But I found that in that very masculine approach, there was also that kind of suspicion, I think, of just mediumship and teaching mediumship. And so despite having perhaps a proclivity for that space or that area of psyche development, I never actually pursued it for years and years and years. And this would come back later, as per what you were talking about, Sean, with the dark night of the soul, because as I found this kind of decline effect in my sense of purpose and happiness, which is kind of slow over several years, and I'd find things to kind of keep it propped up. We'll just say that. I found that it just got to a point where this thing that was missing became perhaps more and more present, more and more perhaps urgent, although I didn't necessarily see that. And I think that was for me to embody aspects of my gifts that I had not given the opportunity or space to embody. And the organization and the teachers I had studied with, or I would say across different organizations or some of them individual teachers, um, a lot of their work, as great as it was, as magical as it was, and obviously as being something beautiful and sincere that they had created or had been empowering for them, and in the way that they would help others or give back to others, I just found I couldn't find really what I was looking for. And I didn't know that until something in my radar system was like feeling a little bit more and more off over the years. And the company that I had created at the time, which was an e-commerce company, I tied my identity around that. It's a little bit like having a child. I remember in 2004 getting my first web order. This is like way in the early days of the internet. Okay. So I got my first web order in 2004, and I thought, oh my God, this is real. This works. And that was like the real beginning of my journey as an entrepreneur, even though I had run some businesses or tried to run businesses in college. My dad was an entrepreneur. He had a strong effect on me in, kind of thinking for myself. And I remember he told me when I was very young, he's like, you're going to determine in the end your own reality. You will work for yourself and you will be beholden to nobody else. And my dad had a very strong will. And I guess it was kind of a way of imparting some of that knowledge or power to me. And I didn't realize that that would become very useful for me later on when I had to walk aspects of my spiritual path by myself, which I'll get to here shortly. Because up until that point of time, and I think some of us can probably relate to this in the talk, up until that point of time, I was sort of walking my spiritual path and putting kind of like hands on a railing. And what I mean by that is I had other teachers I could kind of lean on for wisdom and for guidance. There was a system and a process and the organization that I was part of and the systems I had studied and learned. But the unfortunate thing about this is that, what another person has experienced, for you on some level can end up becoming dogma, right? It can end up becoming something that could be useful, but then you can, in a sense, over apply it or you over identify with it at the expense of your own unique powers and gifts that are meant to be discovered and developed with just you and you only, perhaps, or perhaps with other people, but not necessarily through the filter or through the mechanism of working with a teacher or an organization or someone else's teachings, as powerful as other people's teachings are. And so I didn't know that really at the time. And later on, I kind of discovered this as I hit this point in 2019, where finally my company, through just disruptions and the internet and all kinds of things, I was down to a very small company, and then it was like me and one other employee who I cared for deeply and was a great friend. And she was kind of helping me keep this company going to the very end until there was really nothing left. And I think what was interesting was I had had some signs years prior that it was time for me to move on, but I was so connected and so attached to the company, this kind of baby I had created, that I didn't want to let it go. There was still a hope I could turn it around, and so I had kind of an emotional investment in this kind of vehicle, if you will, this company that was acting as a vehicle for my financial health and other means. And I had an attachment, and that attachment caused me to waste time. In retrospect, I could have probably cut my losses earlier. I could have jumped ship much earlier, and I could have moved on. But this is where we get to kind of, everything is clearer in hindsight. You have like 2020 vision in hindsight. And that was one of my first powerful lessons too, Sean, that I also learned more about this working with spirit guides. where our identity determines a lot of our experience and a lot of the choices we make in life and a lot of really what we make of our life, like what's in front of us. And part of that comes from the fact that, we're sort of like spirit navigating these avatars in 3D reality with their own personalities and their own egos and their own needs and their own desires and their own belief systems. But here's one of the interesting things, right? And this is a very old spiritual truth. That is not us. Like it is us, but it's not all of us. At least we can say that. And so we really have to tap in as much as we can into the deeper parts of our consciousness and of who we are as spirits as much as we possibly can. And I have a lot of things here to share in terms of tips and advice. One thing just kind of coming to mind here is you have to make space for yourself in this busy world to connect with the deeper aspects of who you are. It is absolutely critical, especially now, I think, in this current time space that we find ourselves in here, for those of us here on the call, because we're in a world now where business and technology have developed to the point where there is a high level of competition for our attention, which is monetized, used and used for various purposes. And so, if anything, I think like if you take a person and you put them, I don't know, in the middle of the mountains with no responsibilities, no, it's like all of a sudden it might be a lot easier to focus, right? Or it might be easier to meditate and kind of get in touch with your true self. And here we have all these things kind of going off continuously. And I really feel for everybody who's empathic and who's psychic, whether you're professional or not. There is a lot of static. There is a lot of information. I've seen guides work with this process too, because people are just, I feel like our energy systems are exposed to a lot compared to probably what we were exposed to maybe in past lives or in history, where there was a lot less stimuli. I mean, you think about someone growing up in the Middle Ages, they know everybody in a village. They've never even left that village for years. It's like they can walk, but maybe they can't afford a horse. I don't know. We're in a very different reality now, right? So the great thing is we have a lot of access to information, which can dynamize our spiritual process and allow us to go into deeper spiritual alignment. But the flip side of this is that there's also a lot of potential to distract or to be taken off course, either in our attention or in our lives with side quests and side projects. This is a term we sometimes talk about in the ADHD space, which is something I've been diagnosed with, so I'm familiar with. Where you kind of go in a lot of different kind of side quests, and the thing is, that the side quests are not really the main quest. It's not where the bulk of your power is meant to kind of come to fruition, or where you reach your full potential. And I have a dear friend of mine who has told me a couple of times, go where the magic is. And I think this is another piece of advice I would give too: is you want to go where your magic is, not where the outside world is telling you to go, and things like this. And there could be a lot of distractions because we have to take care of our financial needs and otherwise. So, kind of coming back to my personal story there, after I had, going back to New York, I decided something was kind of missing. I needed to change. I couldn't tell what it was. We ended up moving to Colorado, roughly 10 years ago, my spouse and I. And what was interesting was I was part of that nonprofit organization still, but I had also found as I grew that, and I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I think spiritual organizations can be helpful, but there can also be a lot of pitfalls in organizations. In my personal experience, I think if I could just speak frankly, I think sometimes we get, all of us, because we usually haven't had perfect childhoods, we will tend to inherit some daddy or mommy issues that will tend to then enter in when we meet spiritual teachers or people in positions of authority. And so sometimes we're looking for that thing that we were missing in our childhood. And, in my case, it was like some of the teachers in the school that I was in, which was again quite a masculine school, if I could describe it that way, provided a very strong example of like masculine energy, but within a psychic space, which is not very common actually. But I also came to realize too, there was kind of a little bit of like our way or the highway. And I realized I had to kind of break off on my own to discover my own parts of my own self. I needed that space and that freedom. And I had to let go of these organizations, including my business, that I had been part of and I'd given so much of my life to. And so that can be scary because you can be faced with sort of a void. And the interesting thing with the spiritual path is you'll find sometimes that the next step is not a certain step where you are going to know what's going to happen and you're kind of like safe. I think sometimes the inspirations given to us by guides are very bold and they're very audacious. And I think that people sometimes underestimate this because if you think about it, is a guide going to spend the energy to come down and give you an intuition that, look, you should really order a different brand of like paper towel? It's like, no, they're not going to spend time doing this. And so, my point with this example is they're going to invest energy in areas that will dynamize your personal development and growth and help you to reach your potential, essentially. And they know a lot more about you than you know about yourself, and they know what you may have done either in parallel lives or past lives or other existences, and so they just know more about that potential, and so they're going to bring things to you that you can handle, that you can do, but in this current avatar body is going to sometimes seem like completely crazy or ridiculous. And I wanted to share an experience, Sean, here that was interesting going back 20 years. This is actually when I was in that organization teaching, astral projection and lucid dreaming and doing psychic development. I went on a trip to Brazil with my family. Okay, so I think I was about probably at this time, I don't know, 22 or 23. And we were on the beach. This was in Rio de Janeiro, and there was a lady down near the water who kind of appeared. I think it's like the lady that was in the Chiquita banana logo. She had like all the fruits on her in her hat or on her head. And it was not a sight I've seen very often, or probably never since. I've been to Brazil. But this lady was selling, I don't know if it was ice cream or fruit or something like this. And what was interesting was she stopped, looked in our direction from several hundred feet away. I mean, this is like kind of far down the beach, several hundred feet away. And she looked up and then all of a sudden kind of walked in our direction, made her way through the crowd of people on the beach, and then stopped right there at our family. And then I remember this very clearly. She asked us if we wanted to buy anything. And then she had said, look, actually, the real reason I'm here is because of him. And she pointed at me. And she said that I'm a medium with the Spiritist Church, and this man here is also a medium or meant to be a medium. And I remember I got very emotional. There was kind of like a spiritual recognition of this person, perhaps like seeing a very old friend who took a different path. It's not the path I meant to go in this lifetime, but someone who I could kind of connect with and still resonate with. And she ended up sharing some information that and she actually started saying a bunch of things that kind of spooked members of my family because they were psychic and accurate. And I remember her telling me some things like, there were children in my field, my energy field, that were being healed by my field, and some other things that seemed to corroborate with some perceptions I was kind of having at the time. And she had told me that, you will become a developed medium, or she told me I'd become a very developed medium, but you will, unlike me, you will follow your own path and in the end up becoming your own teacher. And which just struck me very much when she shared this with me. And what was funny about this, Sean, is that, I mean, you think this is over 20 years ago, right? Not until close to 20 years later did I then pursue mediumship and taking some classes and then actually becoming a professional medium in a channel. And I remember when, after 2019, when my company closed and I was in major financial duress, this is kind of the beginning of my dark night of the soul, really. I had this sense of meaningless, a lack of purpose. I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I had moments where I thought, like, what is the purpose of me being here? I tried to create some new businesses. They didn't work. It was almost like nothing, like the magic I could create before, it just failed. It was almost like having a wand from Harry Potter, and it's like it's not working anymore. It doesn't seem to cast a spell anymore. I couldn't do it, and it felt to me, based on a kind of a download that I had, that it's like this is not a role for me anymore to create businesses and hire people and be in the e-commerce or tech space. That phase was done. That's somebody else's role. And it's like, okay, so then what am I supposed to do now? And I didn't know I had the financial burden, so I didn't know how to make money, but also kind of keep active in the spiritual space and so all this teaching I had done in the past on psychic development, I had never charged anybody. This was all volunteer work I did in an organization. which probably in retrospect was not fully healthy, but that's another kind of aspect of discernment I had to kind of take in. And what was interesting was just when nothing would work and I didn't know where to go or what to do, it's like another inspiration came to me to take a mediumship class. And this is actually after I tried a bunch of different jobs. I tried applying to jobs, like hundreds of jobs. It wouldn't work. People didn't want to hire an entrepreneur. It was like kind of failure after failure, like wall after wall. And so this kind of inspiration came in to take a class. And what's funny is that story of the lady walking hundreds and hundreds of feet to me on this beach. I think it was in Copacabana, if I don't or if I remember correctly, telling me that I'm a medium and I was destined to kind of be a medium or a channel. And then to the point where I actually started taking these classes, there was a huge gap. I got a lot of things done. I had a lot of life experiences, but there was a very big gap. And I have to ask the question in retrospect, right? Why didn't I just take that and follow that? Well, personally, I would say I was entangled with a lot of stuff and I was busy with all these life things. I was in a volunteering as a coordinator or a manager in this nonprofit. I had a business and I was kind of young and finding myself. And so it really took from the time I had the inspiration coming through this lady to the time I executed and actually followed through. That huge gap occurred. And what was funny is when I went to my first mediumship class, I had this knowing just came over me when I was in the class, just a feeling of joy and that I had found what I was looking for. It was almost like everything up into my life was leading up to this moment. And despite all of my psychic experiences, astral projection experiences, and all the other stuff that had happened, um, that wasn't enough in a sense. And it wasn't really like it wasn't enough. It kind of be like, well, what is like enough for what? Right? It was more like I hadn't actually fully explored and accepted all of my gifts and my abilities. And those are those specific abilities that are meant to be used in a certain way with other people. And what was interesting is that from that evidential mediumship workshop, I ended up taking other classes. I started working professionally as an evidential medium. My guides then taught me how to scan people's chakras and do chakra readings. And then there was kind of like more and more information coming through with the intuitive scans. And then I found myself helping people to kind of go through breakthroughs emotionally or physically or mentally emotionally. And I started doing coaching and working with people kind of in containers. And what was interesting is that there's been this kind of evolution of that work, but all of them being built on these prior steps before. And so now I
Hey,
incorporate
hey,
everything
Gabe,
going back.
before we go to where you are now, can we
Yeah,
talk a little more about, because as you know, and a lot of people
yeah,
who know my story, like where we have so many similarities,
yeah,
except
yeah.
you listened, you didn't need to be hit over the head with a few NDEs like I did. And I was more stubborn. But so so first of all, you came into this world with these psychic gifts. Why
Yeah.
do you think that was? And and then what was it? Was it in your up? What was it that made you for a while kind of lose it,
hmm
or go away from that?
Yeah. Okay. So great question, Sean. So I think I had those psychic experiences for a couple of reasons. One is because I think I just had a proclivity to have psychic experiences, just the way my energy was. This could be even like, I don't know, experiences from past lives. It could be things that went into that I'm not totally sure about. But some of it just seemed very natural, and it felt very natural to the way I kind of processed and interacted with the world. Although I didn't really recognize it as such, and I didn't necessarily use it in kind of a willed or controlled way to bring about a result for myself or other people. I think that, my parents, for all the wonderful things they helped me with. I mean, I wouldn't say they've described themselves as being psychic or have any interest in psychic phenomena. And so as a result, I wasn't really exposed to anything that normalized that. And over time, my focus, as it happens to all of us, became more and more on the physical world. And these things kind of faded. These abilities, I paid less attention to them and more on these things in front of me. And if you think about it, when we go through our life, as we're kind of having these sort of coming of ages, I remember a friend of mine who's a healer told me, because we were talking about our kids, and I think she has a son who's like 8 or 9, but she was saying she thinks at that age, kids sometimes have like a, oh my God, this is actually real. Like I signed up for this. They have a moment where this kind of kicks in. And, as we kind of have those experiences, things become kind of heavier and more serious for us because we realize I'm in the physical world. I might not have my parents all the time, and I got to figure stuff out, and I have to like know who I am, and I have to find a way to make income, and I have to find my place in the world. And so there's kind of a lot that comes with that, including sometimes a heaviness that can come with that. But I think the pressure from that naturally took me away from those things kind of growing up until I became a teenager. And then I was like, something's not right. Like there must be a greater purpose. There's got something seems to be missing. This feels like I'm in a dream. And, like, what am I supposed to just like go get a job and like have a family and like 2.3 kids? And I'm like, what? Like, anyway, and there's nothing wrong with those things. That could be part of someone's divine path. And I have a child now. But at that moment as a teenager, it just felt like there was a deeper reality, and it was something was telling me pay attention to the deeper reality, just as I had kind of lost focus and lost some of those abilities.
Did you
So
feel supported, or
mhm.
did the conditioning of your family or this world make you maybe start doubting some of the things that were happening? Or did you always know they were real? You just,
Yeah, that's a good question, Chubb, because I feel like I didn't always know that they were real. And the thing is, as my own mind developed, and this is one of the reasons why I probably went into philosophy when I was in college and psychology. I mean, I developed kind of an analytical mind and a critical mind that served me very well. Although later it became kind of a little bit of a liability because it affected my identity. And then when it came to becoming a medium, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to become a medium. I mean, just pulling things out of thin air, making mistakes. I mean, there's a chance I could hurt someone. Forget it, So that identity I kind of created when I was younger, and that kind of matured, and then probably from an intellectual standpoint, from I don't know, logical mind, I was probably at my peak in college. That ended up actually developing some of my faculties, and then getting in the way because I over identified with it. It became too much of who I was, and then I had a hard time to let go because I felt like I was letting go of my science self and like my attachment to physical reality and logic and reason. And I had gotten to this funny point, Sean, in college where I talking to my mentor, they were getting ready to send me to like one of the best philosophy schools in the country. It's either like Arizona at the time or Harvard. But they told me, look, Gabe, there's the one thing you got to promise us in academia: you cannot talk about your psi experiences. And I thought, what? But that goes against the very, like John Locke and Francis Bacon, the very foundations of science, which was to investigate all of reality using a reliable method to figure out truth or find truth or to do it just was incompatible. And I just said, no, like, I'm not going to do it. Like, because that would be putting another part of myself to the side. And it was once again society asking me to here, go here, but now you're gonna have to put this to the side again, or you're gonna have to focus on more physical things and less on the non-physical. And so, at least at that juncture, I feel like I made the correct choice.
and how much of that do you think actually led to your dark night of the soul? That you have this part of you that you know is
Mm.
real, but this world that we live in, which seems very real, is telling you to
Yeah,
put that side to the side. The real
yeah,
you
yeah,
that's connected to everything, put that to the side. Do you think that led to your dark night of the soul? What do you think led to that?
yeah. So I think that I mentioned the identity component, kind of creating a narrative and a series of stories about who I am. You could also connect the aspect or component of the idealized self-image we may have about ourselves. This also kind of enters into the equation of our kind of complete identity. And I think that identity that was formed in my younger years or from childhood into younger years was very seriously challenged as I kind of approached, really my late 30s and into my 40s. And so that was one component that I definitely think led to that dark night of the soul, because to accept some of those gifts and things that were kind of coming through, I had to really let go of who I thought I was. And I had people too over time that told me, oh, oh, you seem to be psychic, but maybe you're not as psychic as this person. And we obviously will hear about personalities and people in the public, and we might compare ourselves, or, oh, that's so amazing. He had this really incredible telepathic experience. I've never had that. So we form all these stories, and sometimes spirit just goes, release it, and now just kind of move forward, and don't necessarily kind of just go into all these stories. So I think that another component that led to that dark night of the soul, Sean, for me, was on a mental level, was the stories I had created about myself, including my limitations and my beliefs around what I was capable of or not capable of. It's like, hey, other people are psychics. I'm not a psychic. And somebody could say, well, yeah, you've had, hundreds of out-of-body experiences, but I didn't see myself that way. And that's not something you do as a reading for a client. And I couldn't see how I could monetize that and make a living from that. It was something I just decided to give away up until that point in time. So these things had to be kind of rearranged, and it was tough. It was very tough, and I had to kind of figure out, how do I meet my financial needs in the physical world, and how do I embrace my gifts now, and develop those gifts and give them to the world, right? Because in a sense, they're really not ours. We're kind of like caretakers of them, is like the perspective I like to take. And someone could always say, well, Gabe, I have gifts, but I don't have any obligation to give them. Okay, sure, but there's probably some spiritual law out there that probably says something like, if you have these gifts and you are capable of giving them, and they are deeply part of who you are, you're probably meant to give them, something like that. And if you don't, or it's missing, even if you don't know what your gift is, you may start to experience things like anxiety or depression, or something's off, or really what are modern versions of shaman sickness, where it's like, there is a sign here, you need to get on track, and you're not seeing the whole thing. You don't have the whole picture, but there's enough to tell you something is off. You need to switch, right, or move. So
And that's what's so cool is you didn't need an NDE to get that message. Some
yeah,
of
yeah, and
us
I
need
suppose
to be
so.
hit over the head, like me,
Yeah,
and
I
you didn't
yeah, I
need
just
it.
needed to
You
have some.
listened.
Yeah, and maybe what I needed was, right, this period, Sean, of losing faith and feeling purposelessness and all the negative emotions that kind of came with that. And because at the end of the day, those things are really, they're kind of blessings, right? They kind of help to redirect. And I think you and I were talking about this, right? The experience is not always. It's like, hey, I had a near death experience, or I had an out of body experience. It's like, okay, so now here's really the question: what does that mean to you? What are you going to do with that? Those are the real questions, because everybody, and there's so many people that have psychic and spiritual experiences, or have had some, but that's not really what this is about. Because if I
Right,
collect
because
those, like,
sometimes you're just exchanging one story for another story.
exactly, exactly. And sometimes, and this gets into when you get to like the spiritualized ego or spiritual bypassing, where the spiritual experience just becomes another story that your ego narrative is creating to kind of explain how, like, oh, I'm a little bit special, or like I'm a little different, or, like, okay, I have this awareness. And it's like, okay, so what are you going to do? Right. I have a member of my family who was a banker. And I admire him greatly. He had a lot of wisdom from his experience. He managed hundreds of employees. I remember once he told me, he was very grounded. He told me, Gabe, okay, so that's nice, but how does this benefit you now, here, today? Like, what does that do for you? Like right now, here, today? And I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, it kind of bring me down from the clouds, and and that would probably apply to this discussion here. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So
Hmm.
when you're in the middle of a dark night of the soul, it
Yeah.
is so dark. You're so cut off.
Hmm.
Um, so speaking from my own experience, I tried all these ways to get around it. And
Yeah.
what I realized eventually is there is no way around it. You have to go through it. So, so
Yes.
how did that happen for you? And
Hmm.
also, for everybody who's listening, maybe talk about how the dark night of the soul can actually be a blessing. Because in my
Hmm.
experience, something great always happens afterwards, even though you don't believe that when you're in the middle of it. And then
Yeah.
also we tend to beat ourselves up, but many people, as you and I, we're talking, many people like Saint Teresa have had many
Hmm.
dark nights of the soul, and in fact, she was
Yes.
going through one when she died. So maybe talk a little bit more about that, because coming through it, and
Hmm.
like you have done, it's pretty amazing, and I think you could help a lot of people
Hmm.
in just talking about how you did that.
Yeah, yeah. So a few things that kind of come to mind, Sean, around that. So regarding your first question of moving through rather than moving around, so this is coming from my life experience and just coming from my work with clients when I share this. I think that just we were talking before or previously around this aspect of distraction. I think there are a lot of times things that are maybe in front of us for us to look at, to self-confront about, or to kind kind of investigate. Could be like an aspect of ourselves or our self knowledge to kind of go deeper into. And we will sometimes, because that is a harder thing to do, we'll sometimes put our attention on those side quests I was talking about before, or in distraction. So I think sometimes one of the first principles would be being as honest as you can with yourself and your situation, as deadly honest as you can be, like very, very forthright as you can. And I don't think that's something that always comes natural to us as humans, because we're surrounded in a world that actually thrives on misleading people and like deception and things like that, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I mean, you look at our society and our economic system and things like this, and you know how things play out energetically. So cultivating that is something that can help you. Is really being true. Like if you were to make a list right now and say, what do you really, really know? I don't mean something you heard on YouTube or something else. What is it you really know? And what is it you know pertaining to you and in terms of what the vision is for your life or what the next steps are for you? I think that's one way to kind of really cut out the noise. And I think going into a special space, whether it's meditation or a special room or something, is a great way to do that. And I had to have a little bit of that alone time to get me through the dark night of the soul, like kind of going down and deeper rather than kind of escaping, like, oh my God, another negative emotion. I can't handle this. And by the way, for everybody here on the call, I want to tell you something that I feel is very interesting that I've observed since then, since that time period, some years ago, which is you may not be in like a full-fledged dark night of the soul, but there's some degree of alignment that you're in as a person right now. And so, like, if you were to imagine spirit guides materializing, they could probably give you an evaluation of how close you are in that alignment. And you could think of this in a few different ways. One is from what you intended to do to where you are now and what you're doing. So, what you intended to do before you were born to where you are now. How is that alignment? Like, is that alignment like close? Is it closer than it was 5 years ago? Or is it just a little bit off? And why would it be a little bit off? So I think what's interesting for us as an instrument for our self-research and our self-investigation is to look at where some of that like fine-tuning calibration maybe could occur, because sometimes that fine-tuning calibration could be a very big difference. And sometimes if you think like here's your life path moving along, and then you just calibrate 1%, and then over time you're now on a different path, right, as that kind of continues. And so it's worthwhile to look at this, and to investigate inside of yourself. Are you being as coherent as you can with all of your values? I think one thing for me, Sean, was that I wasn't really living to my truest and dearest values, and some of my values were around personal development and spirituality. And I think if you have a very strong valuing of spirituality and personal development, that includes giving to others and embodying love. I think that's a very, very big part of it. And so if there's another level for you to embody love, then that's probably something you would want to move towards or go towards, as a general guideline. So I think that there's probably some other elements that I think help me too. One is finally accepting that if the intuitions I'm getting or downloads from guides might be crazy, well, who cares? We'll just follow them anyway. So that was kind of one thing that happened. And something that comes through that seems so impractical and not the thing that would solve the problems in front of me. It's like, I have a family. I had a baby daughter at the time, and I'm hearing from my greater family. It's like you got to get a job, you got to take care of your family, you got to do all this. But then it was like I was like applying to jobs and I couldn't make anything work and nothing would work. And then when I went into that mediumship class, everything worked. Like everything began to conspire in my favor. And that was a big learning lesson. It's like, how far out of an idea can a spirit guide give you and you can still trust? Because you have like, everyone can say, oh, I trust the spirit world. Like, okay, yeah, we all trust this. I'm sure everybody in the call here, we all trust the spirit world on some level. We would probably say that, right? But there's like trust, and then there's like real trust. Because if a spirit guide came to you and you're on the street and said, "We need you to go over to that lady across the street and just tell her that her father is here. His name is David, and he wants to deliver this message." And you're like, "I don't even know that lady. I'm not going to do that." That's just like your mind might even block that off from the get-go because it's so out there for you to even consider as a course of action this inspiration. So how far can they push you? Right? That's something to kind of think about. And I had to expand that to get through this dark night of the soul, which was really acknowledging what was already coming to me and then now just living to that.
It's
So,
funny
and
that you
Sean,
just said that because I don't know if this person's here, but they were here a little while ago. And after my NDE, I was doing all these spiritual book studies, um,
Hmm.
and I hadn't started my sharing group or anything, but I was having those experiences, and it was like I don't want people to think I'm crazy. That was my
Yeah,
big thing. It's like,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I saw, but this person, I was around her all day, and I kept seeing this horse around her, and it was driving
Hmm.
me nuts because, like, this voice is like, "Well, you have these gifts, you have to say something," and and I was like, "Oh my god, she's gonna think I'm nuts. Everybody's gonna think I'm nuts." And at some point,
Yeah,
I said, "This is gonna sound crazy, but I see this horse around you. Are
yeah.
you into horses or?" And she said her horse had just passed away,
Wow.
and
Yeah. So there
yeah,
you go. Yeah,
so yeah, our ego. So it's almost like we
yeah.
have to give up that
Hmm.
ego and that part of us, at least for me, that needs validation, that needs to be liked, and just be willing to risk being crazy, or having people think you're crazy.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree, Sean. And in one way, we could almost describe this as like embracing our inner Doctor Strange. It's kind of like, how far can you go? If you're not beholden to this reality, and yeah, you've got the avatar, you're in 3D space, but there's a lot you can do in other planes of existence and other dimensions. And so, why would you be beholden to one over the other? And if you think about it, like what you're sharing there, which is a great example, that to a spirit guide, that wouldn't seem crazy at all. But to a lot of people in our society, it just like, what is this guy talking? Why would you go up to somebody and mention a horse or something, right? I noticed too in my because I work with developing mediums and channels as well, Sean, and I want to kind of mention something too. And when I work with development with them, either mediumship or intuitive development, I feel like expanding that kind of like tolerance for crazy, it kind of continues to just increase. I think it's kind of an ongoing kind of process. I find things are still challenging me. I mean, even when you and I were talking about me sharing this event on my Facebook page, which is I never use, when I went to go finally post it, I had noticed there was a little bit of resistance in me, right? And I thought, oh, okay, that's good. So I'm going to have to just overcome this because it feels correct, right? And so here I am delivering, mediumship sessions to people professionally, and then there's still little elements like this that come up that I get a little afraid of. Like maybe I'm afraid of exposing myself, or it kind of speaks to a trauma that I may still have some remnants of. So you really have to be looking under every single stone. You cannot leave anything unturned. Everything has to be looked at, especially if you're in a place where you feel you're not in full alignment. I would start to kind of investigate, like, what are all the things there then? Like, what's happening? Why are you on your current path, and how do we kind of get you a little bit over here? That would be important. So I think, Sean, you had mentioned also to the other question around, um, I think you had another question around Dark Night of the Soul that you'd asked before.
Yeah.
There was a couple
Yeah.
questions.
So how did you finally get through it?
Okay.
And
Yeah. So,
yeah, like,
yeah.
I mean, because it's huge to get through it. I mean, for
Yeah.
many, it can last years,
Yes. Yes. No doubt.
decades. Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah. I think you can definitely be in something like that for years. And I think it depends on the person, but if at least I found this with my case, I find this with a lot of sensitives and empaths and psychic people, where we're just very sensitive to our external reality, and we might start to feel sick even, or have an illness or a mystery illness appear that could be a calling to take further steps to kind of go in a certain direction. And I think that for me, getting through that dark night of the soul required me to go through a completion process of really shifting my identity fundamentally, and trusting spirit enough to kind of get over the other side of the fence. And for me, that was getting to the point where I now had embraced these gifts that I had kind of ignored for many years, despite developing other ones. I had ignored them for many years. I had embraced them. I had accepted that it was part of who I was. And I had accepted also that this was something for me to give back to the world, and it felt correct. And for me to be in this space, and also to kind of come to a level of trust that, as crazy as this is, this feels like the right direction. I'm going to keep going here. And it's a little bit like the running was powering the running, just the act of the kind of like feeling a little bit like the universe is kind of conspiring in your favor, and energies are flowing, you're having synchronicities, etc. All of those things were signs for me to kind of keep going and to kind of keep moving. And I think you can stop in the middle of that because you might encounter something that's a little too scary to move through. Like, and I think this happens, it tends to happen on an identity level. I tend to find this also happens for people on like a financial level. If there's a financial threat, the pocket chakra is like very sensitive, and so there's elements like that to kind of consider. And I had to get to the point where I had to move through all those spaces, and really had to believe in myself and get my spouse's trust. And like, look, I think, hey, remember all those hundreds of jobs I applied to? They couldn't, nothing would work. And I think I finally got a sales job offer at Yelp or something, and it sounded, it was going to be brutal, just brutal, like doing cold calls with people. But like having gone through all of that, and getting to this point, it was like, hey, this seems to be working. I'm seeing little victories or little successes or developments. My energy's improving, my health's improving. So why don't I just keep moving in that direction? I don't see the financial reward yet, but that's okay because it feels like this is not really part of that, but it feels like it'll take care of it. And everything ended up working out as I kind of trusted that. I feel there's probably many people, Sean, that have a lot of these abilities, but maybe have not embraced them. And we can sometimes create some separation between ourselves and people that we may see as being either more competent or skilled or something. But you really have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in that possibility, and you have to trust spirit because spirit's going to know what you're capable of much more than you do. It's a little bit like if you're getting, well, and maybe it's not the greatest analogy, but if you got I don't know, a note or a letter from the general, and then the soldier is kind of going, no, but I don't know about these plans. It's like, you're not looking over the entire battlefield here or something,
Right.
to use that kind of analogy. It's like you don't have the whole scope of vision. So do you really trust your ego-based decisions in this particular space? It would be kind of problematic. So yeah, I kind of wanted to share that there. There was another, I don't know if you had something you wanted to bring up, but I had a couple of other things I could
Well, I
share.
was going to say, yeah, that's so important because for me and many of us, I mean, the dark night of the soul and depression is usually brought on because we're not in
Mm-hmm.
alignment with our spiritual purpose or soul contract or what we came here to do. And
Yeah.
what was
Yeah.
interesting though is you were talking about when you talked about the side tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After my NDE for 6 to 8 months, I was just like kicking myself the last NDE because I'm like, why didn't I wanted? I wish I'd known all this like 30 years ago. Everything would have been
Mm-hmm.
different.
Yeah.
And it's like I went off the track, and I said for like a year or so I went off track. But what I found is that was my path. To go
Mm-hmm.
off my path was my path. Like I had to
Yeah.
achieve
Yeah.
those things to know those things meant nothing. So maybe,
Yeah.
talk a little about, well, you've already kind of talked about it, but like your that worldly validation that we all kind of
Mm-hmm.
want
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
had something to do with you going to New York and doing all that, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
and then realizing it was the false self, which what you mentioned, it reminded me of Dom Miguel Ruiz in the Four Agreements, where he talks
Yeah.
about like 95% of what we think we know, we've learned, somebody told us, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and somebody told them.
Yeah. 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 And that's a great point, Sean. I think, something that kind of comes to mind here too is because you were mentioning that period in New York. I kind of feel like the first half of our life, and this is, I don't know, if I were to take a guess, maybe it's up until the age of 35 or 36. I feel like we're trying to find our place in the world. We're trying to solidify our identity. We're trying to figure out, we're trying to get that approval from the outside world. And then as we get older, it's somewhere in some way, shape, or form, something in there shifts, as we work on our healing process. And we end up really just caring about getting into alignment, which really is what it kind of comes down to. And we don't care so much about, like for me, if there's like, okay, there's two people on this call. Okay. I mean, it felt right for me to do this call with you. And we're having a great time here and talking about interesting things. It's like, okay, great. It's like, it is, you kind of have to like let go of some of those cares and concerns, especially if you want to refine the path that you're on and your ability to kind of work with guides and develop the relationship with guides. Because again, this is like, things that are coming from spirit are not always things that bring you societal rewards or financial rewards.
Totally. Yeah.
This is
Tell me more about that because you actually do have to give up your
mhm.
belief, or at least in my experience, live up, give up all these rewards and accolades of this world. Uh, but the
Yes.
rewards and connected with the spirit world are so much greater and eternal, and the only thing you can take
Yes.
with you.
Yeah, totally, Sean. I would completely agree with you. And I think there's always going to be a potential to get rewards from society or the external world. It makes me think a little bit of like the archetype of the prostitute, which is maybe not what people think it is, but it's really when you're kind of prostituting your energy. I feel like it's an archetype actually a lot of people in society embody, where they are just kind of giving off their energy towards something that is used by someone else at the expense of their own power. And we lose our power when we do that. And if we look at it from the perspective of power, because clairvoyantly, I kind of see it that way just in my work over time, where whether you're trying to help a healer become more and more powerful or get on track, or whether you're trying to help a client with a breakthrough, like maybe releasing themselves from a toxic marriage or something, something is taking away that person's power, and you getting into your own power and releasing whatever is causing that energy leak or taking the power away is a really key critical step to moving through this, right? And then aligning with spirit and working with spirit. And usually it's a little bit like you're trading for something else, like prestige. I tend to look at it as usually like power, prestige, or position. And power could include financial power too. I feel like these elements are usually things that people are trading some part of their energy for, the power, prestige, or position. A lot of times it's not only those, but usually that doesn't serve us in the long run. It's because again, this is like an ego gain, or and it doesn't mean you may not have power or you may not have a lot like incredible position or something as a part of doing your spiritual path. That might just be part of it. It's when we seek these things at the expense of what our intuition is telling us to do or what our guides are bringing us to go towards. That's where we're going to probably pay a price, and that price could be pretty big. It could be pretty big. It could be a health issue. It could be that depression, anxiety. You look at how many people have anxiety in today's society. I mean, that's interesting and I think quite telling. And I feel like these are all signs or symptoms, right? That you have traded something for something else. And you now have to renegotiate that relationship with yourself and the universe to come into greater balance, into a way that you're going to become now more powerful. And I can speak from the psychic space. I had some history courses I did years ago on the history of spiritual and psychic experiences. One was like a 12-hour history course, which is kind of crazy to make it kind of think I had people sit through that long of a history course. But what was interesting when I looked in a lot of history, you end up finding people that are incredibly psychic. I mean, people seeing auras out 20 feet with the capabilities of that would probably, psychic ability wise, exceed anything that we're familiar with anyone we know alive. And I don't even know if some of the half those stories, the mythological stories of people levitating and floating in Tibet 800 feet in the air, these kinds of stories that you read about in myths and legends and histories, I think we're likely some of them were true. And so I just share that here briefly to kind of go, whatever you think the top level of your potential is, just raise it as high as you can, because again, you probably just don't know what that is. And you're a unique individual, you're a unique soul. Nobody else is like you. There is something that is meant to be birthed from you into this world. And maybe that's a conversation, maybe that's information, maybe that's energy, maybe it's something else. But that is a really powerful thing. So please don't underestimate yourself and don't put yourself to the side or think like, I'm part of the spiritual movement, but I'm not as important as these people. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You got to stop right there, because you are important. You're very important. And the world is badly in need of healing. There is such a need of healing in the world today. I mean, I think that if people think, well, there's already people doing that work, like, hey, there's already tens of thousands of mediums or tens of thousands of healers or hundreds of thousands of healers. And what would happen if, a guide came here and said, are you kidding? That's a fraction of what we need. All of a sudden we might be like, oh, what? Like, you know, because there's so much we don't see, right? And
Right.
so,
And now
yeah,
more than ever, because all you
mhm,
have to do is,
yeah,
look online or turn on the news, and the
yeah,
forces of the other side are so
hmm,
strong. So yes,
yes,
everybody is
yes,
needed. And
absolutely,
like
absolutely.
you had said at some point, like it's not like you're gonna just get this big purpose, like do this. It's following the
Hmm.
breadcrumbs, just listening to the little things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those breadcrumbs, I think, are really critical, Sean, because, we're not going to have, um, I remember one time in a workshop, I'll give you kind of a quick example of what I was about to share. We're not going to have a situation like this where, I remember somebody in a workshop that I was in had said, look, I think that, um, my guides are not trying hard enough. Like I can't actually hear them. And I would like to ask them to make a better effort. This is not the problem on the side of the equation that I see. There was also another person in one of my workshops years ago who I remember had said, look, I think that my guides can't keep up with me. Like I'm moving so quickly, as if this person had the B team or something. It doesn't work this way. Okay. At least in my experience, you're not going to get the B team of guides or helpers. It's easy for us to kind of put that some responsibilities of ours indirectly or unconsciously onto something else as to why we're not getting the results we're looking for. But we underestimate our power. Overall, we underestimate our power. And as a result, there's a lot of things that become inaccessible to us or some change in our life that we can't quite get to or we can't make happen. And just when you think you've given it all or you've used every resource, I will tell you right now, there is something else inside of you that will act as another power that will help you get through the situation you're in. You just have to keep digging and bringing that out. And as you do, you change as a person and you'll continue to grow and you'll continue to grow and to emanate love and connection with all living things more and more and more. And so, Shana, one way I like to kind of contextualize this is we're all kind of like a child of the universe. And you think about how magical and how special that is in and of itself, that you're just a divine being, right? That's kind of amazing. Like if we really accept that to be true, and if that's the case, then how can we create a limit on what you're capable of, and where your alignment can go? Maybe you're going to end up doing something very different than you envisioned or what your parents told you you would be or what society tells you should do to be successful. And you know what? Who cares? Like who cares? Because you might be that child of the universe and again you're unique and you're meant to bring about something we've never seen before. And again, that could be one conversation with a person they've never had in all of their past lives. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be awesome and I'm just waiting for you to bring it about. So I just wanted to share that idea here.
I love that. That's really great. And for those of you that have some questions, put them in the chat, send them to us in the chat. And I have a few more. Wow, we could
Sure.
go on forever, couldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah. This is fun
So
for sure. There's a lot
yeah,
here too.
yeah, there is. I mean, you and I are. It's funny. I always look at people like you and I admire them. No, they didn't have to go sit in the ICU and have a timeout, and,
Yeah.
and like, get in alignment. I'm always amazed that some
Yeah.
people can get the message without going to the ICU and having an
Yeah.
NDE. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think to some of you were saying before, Sean, I mean, that ends up becoming part of the beauty of your story. And in a sense, you're holding that space that you held as a unique being in the universe for all of us, because you're a divine soul that's part of this greater soul, if you will. And it's kind of like you went through an experience that now we can learn from, a unique experience that no one's going to have exactly that way, right? That's a pretty powerful thing, even if, of course, it's not pleasant. We're talking about,
right.
yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what that was like for you and what some other people have gone through. And I remember one of my out of body experience classes, a lady showed up who had never heard about out of body experiences and ended up telling me that, I came to this class because I was sitting reading a book. And she was on the first floor of a building in Brooklyn, and a car crashed into her building at like 60 plus miles an hour. And she launched out of her physical body. She saw the ambulance, and she had a near death experience, but it was very unpleasant, lots of injuries but now, I have the opportunity to share her story and her truth,
Right.
with other people, which is really, it's an eye-opening thing, right? So, we're able to take that and make it into a gift or, that's
Oh,
one way of looking
totally. And that's what's funny is, so like in my sharing groups and stuff, people will
at it.
start
Hmm.
off with, well, I haven't had an NDE, as if somehow that makes them lesser.
Yeah,
What?
yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
that's great that you didn't need an NDE to like get the message.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's same thing. It's like if someone's like, "Oh, I haven't had a dark night of the soul." I don't think that necessarily says anything per se about your potential or what you're capable of. We'd have to be very careful before we come to a judgment about that, right? because maybe you've made decisions that are more in alignment and you have had the opportunity to skip some of the more painful lesson detours, right? That some of
Right.
us have had to go through because we couldn't let go of our identity or our story or some part that we were just holding on to due to fear or whatever might be there, right? Around like, oh my God, what's going to happen on the other side of this? I don't know. There's no answer. There's no example. Oh my God, it's kind of like death, right?
Yeah.
And so,
And you know what else? For me, it's like, so it's the split mind. Am I going to think
Mhm.
with this ego that is not
Yeah,
me? Or am I going to think with spirit? And who am I going to listen to?
yeah, yeah. And that requires careful navigation because at the end of the day, no matter how many spiritual experiences you had, I mean, I'm again sharing from personal experience, you're still here in the 3D,
Right.
right? And you've got to, well, most of us will have to like pay the bills at the end of the month, take a phone call from a friend or family. I mean, you're not going to just go up into the clouds and ignore everything. You have to integrate your spirituality with the physical world. Like
You
it's,
know what? And I'm glad you brought that up because
Mhm.
that was something I wanted to talk to you about. Is so
Mhm.
many of us that have had NDEs and stuff, um, well, especially me. My old life was all about money and validation and worldly
Mhm.
success. Then I had
Mhm.
my NDE, and I will never forget. Like, oh my gosh, I spent my whole life doing all this stuff to become
Mhm.
somebody, and it means nothing.
Yeah,
The degrees mean nothing. The money means nothing. So
yeah,
I went to
yeah.
the other side. In fact,
Mhm.
Ram Dass talks about becoming nobody and how like you spend your whole life becoming somebody, and then you have an awakening
Yeah,
and
yeah.
realize, oh, that doesn't mean anything. So how did you? So a lot of um spiritual people,
Mhm.
myself included, like we have these issues with money, and then we do things, it's like, yeah, you have to pay your rent, you have to do these things, like run these meetings and pay for Zoom and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But like you feel like, oh, I should be giving this gift, I shouldn't be
Mhm.
charging, I'm a spiritual being and giving to the world. But
Yes,
it's like
yes.
that doesn't pay the rent. We're in
Mhm.
this world. So
Mhm.
how did you um what's the word? Like come to terms with that and realize it is okay to have these gifts and to share with the
Yeah.
world, because remember, you had said you had those
Mhm.
beliefs like, oh, I shouldn't charge. Because I think that's
Yes,
really an
yes.
important thing to that
Yeah,
many of
yeah.
us would like
No, that's
to
another
reckon with.
just wonderful question, Sean. And I'll keep this brief because I know we'll have some questions coming in through here. So I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is we're kind of in a period of human history, at least currently, I would say at least in the West, where we're facing a situation where people with spiritual gifts and perhaps spiritual gifts or abilities or things that they're capable of giving back are trying to bring that out into the world. And traditionally, historically, these things have been separated. We kind of delegated spirituality to religion, and where people would go to church and you're giving things for free or doing things for free or volunteering, etc., this kind of thing. And I think there's actually kind of a call now for everybody in the spiritual space, or at least many people in the spiritual space, to actually integrate that into the current economic system that we are in front of and that we face. And as a result, we're actually facing almost like a bit of like pushback from some of the old feelings and thoughts that we maybe even carried from past lives or other incarnations, where we typically did not charge for these things, or there was a corruption element perceived when we put them together, like money and spirituality, or bringing them together. But I actually think, funny enough, it's this exact integration that is needed to help break down certain aspects in society, and to break down some of these barriers where there's certain like associations that were not allowed within patriarchy or were not allowed within society. And that includes, for example, being able to be an entrepreneur and being able to be very spiritually connected to your higher self and to guides and things like that. So that's kind of one key thing. And I think the other component is that helped me personally, I think was just kind of, again, trusting or believing, like if you know this is the direction to go in, right, spirit is going to somehow help you, or it's going to provide, and you may not be able to see that on the financial level, but if you look at something that you have to give, there's some way to give that, and there's probably an ideal channel by which to give that, right? So like Sean, you have all these wonderful traits and gifts, and you're giving them here, running this, IANDS Hawaii group here, and allowing this talk to even take place in this discussion. And so this is one channel for your gifts, right? There could be other channels. And so I think that guides want to bring us to the place where we can do this kind of work full time. It may not be something anyone else has done. Maybe you're going to have to market yourself as something we've never heard of. Maybe you're going to market yourself as something we have 100,000 of, and that's okay, because regardless, you're unique, you're beautiful, you're powerful, and there's going to be a place for you. So you have to just trust that, and not be afraid, to kind of embrace that. And the financial situation will work itself out. But we also have to bring in, sometimes, like if we have masculine and feminine energy, if we want to use that model, we kind of have to bring in our masculine, whether we identify as, male or female. It's like we'll have to use our masculine energy to interact with the physical 3D world in time space and develop some of our capabilities with business. It just doesn't mean that's maybe the main thing we're doing. I
Right.
think we should doing this kind of work.
Right.
And you can get distracted by that. Like if you're a professional healer or someone who's like, oh my God, I can do Reiki, but I can't figure out what the business model is, or I can do this form of healing and I can't. And that can become another diversion or another block. And so, yeah, that's something you just have to probably learn and there might be some things you have to get comfortable with, and you just kind of move forward. And at some point, it's not going to be comfortable. You're going to have to put yourself out in the world and offer your services, and ask for money, ask for an exchange, an energetic exchange. And you may not be comfortable, but that may be what spirit is asking you to do, to bring you out into the world, because they want your gifts to be given to the world. And that may require, in your specific case, to interact with the economy and everything else in a way that's integrated. Not to say that it may not be someone's purpose to go out into the mountains and join a monastery and do that. That could be your
Right.
purpose. But for many of us here in the West, I feel there's a big invitation by spirit in general. I feel like it's happening in a massive way. And I want to share one last thing here, Sean, that I actually kind of wonder if there's an intention on the part of spirit to redistribute economically a lot of wealth and power to people in the spiritual space, or something where people are not being rewarded for toxic masculine traits of dominance. And, you think of like the worst excesses of business in the business world, because it's
Yeah.
not all business is bad at all. But instead, the economic system begins to reward for things like healing, or other things that actually requires us to think outside the box a bit from the old references.
Yeah.
So,
What I
yeah.
found is that when we're in service, when we're coming from sincerity,
Hmm.
and we're supported, like we're supported
Yeah.
by our guides, and we have all the
Hmm.
support, and it doesn't mean you're going to be rich, but you're supported. And,
Yeah.
and that's what I found is like being in service, coming from um helping and serving others, that were supported.
Yeah.
Those people that come from ego, I mean, because I've done that. I did that validation. It always
Hmm.
crumbles at some point. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
everything that's built on illusion eventually crashes. Um,
Yes. Yes.
but so that's awesome. Okay, so just for everybody to know, we're going to go just a little bit over, just because we have all these questions, and they're good questions, and I want
Mm.
you to be able to ask them, or I mean answer them. So what um I want to talk about, hold on a sec, is so so how do we discern, you have these spiritual guides,
Hmm.
and and you have these spiritual experiences. How are you discerning between, um and do you even see it? Like, how do you know when you're talking with a positive, a guide of the light. It's something from the light versus maybe a darkness or something. How do you discern? How do you know?
Okay. So I'm going to kind of summarize this, and if there's any further questions around this, I can go much deeper in this topic. So I think that the first thing I would probably start with here is going into ourselves and using ourself as a reference. And what I mean by that is that when we're receiving ideas, I'm going to give this example, Sean, in the context of ideas. If we're getting ideas, and these ideas could be from guides, or they could be from something that we would not describe as a guide, maybe someone who's crossed over but they're confused or something like that. We have to use our internal reference mark as a way to distinguish what's going on. And what I mean by that is, if you were to, I use this in a few different areas of psychic development, and it will make sense why. If you look at your current state, like your normal day-to-day state, right, you might have like some ups and downs, but you kind of generally have like a baseline. Energetically, you have kind of this general baseline, and you know what it's like for you, for example, to be in a resting spot where you're sitting in a chair, you've gotten sleep the night before, things are generally like, okay, they're normal, right? Let's just say. So when you start to have thoughts or interactions that could be coming like telepathically or could be coming energetically, then we have to see if is something there is bringing you out of your normal range of self. And as it brings you out of your normal range of self, is this bringing you down? Like, are you experiencing negative emotions, or are you feeling inspiration, expansion? There's a lot of different signs you can look for when you're connecting to spirit guides. I have tended to find that different people will be able to demarcate that in different ways, depending on the way they perceive things. But I tend to find that, some of this will sound basic, like when we're having positive thinking or positive thoughts or inspired thoughts. We are tending to have a more likelihood that we are connecting with spirit guides. And if we're not having positive thoughts, right, or we're having thoughts that are more ego based or bringing us down or connected to worry, anxiety, or depression, especially when it's kind of patterning over and over and over, there's a repetition, we're more likely, if we are connecting to a non-physical entity, be connecting to beings that could be of like low frequency. Now, because of my out-of-body experience work and a lot of my experience, I have had a lot of experience with different kinds of beings. If you think of the different kinds of humans on Earth, I feel like it's, I don't know, 100x in multiple dimensions here. And another component of this is you'd have to see, are you even connecting to a being? Because sometimes people think they're connecting to a negative spirit and they're not. They're just connected to a portion of themselves and their own conditioning where they have low self-worth or something, and they're getting repeatedly negative thoughts coming into their awareness. And it could be coming to a head, and that's why it's increasing, but it's not necessarily a spirit. So you'd have to qualify that first part some way, shape, or form. Um, we can't just assume that any kind of negative or positive thought coming in is guides or, less than evolved beings or something like this. I don't know if that answers the question, Sean. I think there was a couple parts to that, but oh,
Yes, sorry.
uh,
That's
no, no
Can
problem.
you hear me? Yeah. So
Yeah.
actually, yeah, no, that's a great answer. And yeah, at the end of the day,
Hmm.
like, um, how do you feel? And
Yeah. Yeah.
a bad spirit or ego is going to
Hmm.
make you feel bad or
Yes. Yes.
heavy. Whereas if it's from spirit, at least in my
Hmm.
experience, it's going to make me feel more light. So, okay,
Yeah.
so another question is,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on the concept that circulates that a strong focus on spiritual or psychic development takes away from spiritual development? Like,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
guess a lot of people have an issue with that. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I feel like we're in a time period where this needs to be addressed. And I think we're kind of in the process of addressing it. And the reason being is because historically speaking, including in religious or mystical paths where psychic phenomena was spoken about or they were aware of it, there was a tendency to direct people towards spiritual development over psychic development because there was a perceived risk or inherent risk to psychic development. Now, the thing is, when we're talking about dogmas and old teachings from like old institutions that were trying to protect people from themselves as well, We can kind of put in context where some of that kind of came from, because we can obviously imagine a case where a person could become psychic and then they misuse this kind of ability, right? However, I think that also has led to a lot of misunderstanding, and we have a lot of people, including children, that are like myself when I was younger, that are born with just having natural psychic abilities, and there's no way to process that or to help normalize that or to get comfortable with that. And so I think we have to create an environment where both are accepted, both spiritual development and psychic development. But I think in our personal paths, we do have to be mindful. It depends on what you are doing when you're really pursuing psychic development, right? Are you taking some abilities you have and refining them for the purpose of using them to help yourself and others? Or are you exploring something because, as I have gained from numerous courses over the years, and having taught many students, some people will do it just for entertainment, and I don't know that's always the best way to approach, in general, to approach this kind of phenomena. It's okay to be curious about something. It's okay to find something kind of like, wow, that's really interesting, right? And I think people sometimes think of like psychic abilities in terms of like X-Men abilities or something, but they're really sometimes seeing it in an attractive way where it's an extension of their ego power because they
Right.
feel powerless in their life.
Yeah.
And it's actually not coming from a place of abundance and giving, which is quite different from the first thing I just said. So I would say that you have to have both. There was, I'm forgetting his name at the moment. Um, it might come back to me. He was a famous spiritualist medium, and he there was an interview that he did. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name here at the moment. Um, that Higginson. Yeah, so I'm forgetting the other part of his name, but he was a very famous spiritualist medium, and he had some comments on this in mediumship development. And part of it was that they seem to go kind of side by side. As you spiritually develop, you're going to have a development of your psychic abilities, and one will kind of help the other, because psychic ability in many cases is a natural extension of just who you are as multidimensional consciousness. If it's natural for me to communicate with family on the other side, why should we make that unnatural? Why should we say, oh, this is dangerous? Please repress that. Don't do that. Let's focus on kind of a more abstract spiritual path. And I would say we need to embrace all of it. I think it has to all kind of come together, and each person's going to be different. Some people will naturally be very psychic, some people may not be, even if we all have the potential to develop that. But you have to kind of put that in the context of where are you right now and what is it you need to work on? Because I do think when I've something I've observed, Sean, with clients is I have sometimes helped them with releasing trauma or just deeply unblocking as a way to get them to develop their psychic abilities. And they don't always seem connected, but they are connected. And so I would tend to always maintain a focus on your healing and your healing process and what is necessary for your healing process, and take that very seriously. And that will always kind of be like the correct companion with the psychic development. And I think you're good to go if you have those kind of two in place, but I would be cautious around suppressing or like kind of expounding fears around psychic abilities. Yeah, we're going to have to deal with this as a society as people become more psychic. And yes, I'm sure we'll have some mutant child born with massive telekinesis abilities, like X-Men or something. And we'll deal with that when we encounter that. Yes, that child will need guidance, probably from some of us here, or all the things all the gifts we left by the time this happens on Earth. But don't be afraid of that. That's not something to be afraid of. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been amazing, and we have to do it again. And I'm
Yeah,
even
sounds
thinking it'd
great.
be really fun to do a workshop on healing our relationship with money, and and sharing our gifts,
Hmm.
and all of that, because it does seem to be an issue that many of us have, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and so that would be kind of fun. But I
Yeah.
want to thank you, Gabe. This has been so much fun. And I just love
Thank you,
talking
Sean.
with you. And of course, we could talk forever.
Yeah.
And So I want to remind all of you that if you're in the Denver, Colorado area, that you can on the 14th, right? You can
Hmm.
see Gabe in person at Boulder Bee's IANDS group. And I want to thank everybody, and hopefully we'll see you all at the meditation class that we have next Tuesday, and then the sharing group. And again, thanks, Gabe. You're just an amazing person and so
Yeah.
much fun to talk with.
Well,
And so
thank you so
happy you're
much.
here.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate the opportunity you gave me here to speak today. And I just want to share all my love with everybody here on the call and just remind you that you are just an incredible being and you have so much to give. And don't be afraid to continue following those breadcrumbs. Yeah, thank you so much for everything that you already have given, the planet and everybody here. So, yeah, thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And we will see you
Bye.
all hopefully next Tuesday. Aloha. Have a wonderful
All
night,
right.
everybody.